Hello and welcome to episode 39 of PhotoKitchen. I am your humble host, MD Welch, and today on the menu, I am behind the camera because I'm going to jump into the menu system of a brand new Sony camera and walk you through some of the features that I think you need to first address, first deal with to get comfortable with this camera. Now, there's some of these features I'm just going to highlight because I've done other videos on them, and I will include the description or link to those videos in the description down below, so check those out. But I am also going to cover some very basic stuff, but things that people sometimes forget to turn on or maybe don't realize that they should turn on or off or at least change on their Sony camera. So first of all, let's just start with the fact that I'm using an A7 Mark IV, borrowed this from a friend who just got this camera, so also helping them out with some settings here. So let's jump right into it. So the first thing you should change or modify or address when you get a new camera, and a lot of people forget to do this, is your date and time. So on the Sony camera, you're gonna go all the way down to the toolbox icon. That's the yellow, #1 for area and date. First of all, make sure that your language is set correctly, and also come into area, date, and time and make sure that you have your area settings, your daylight savings time on, and your date, time, and format. Now, a few good things to point out here. Daylight savings, by turning this on and off, you don't have to change the actual time. That's a nice feature. And one setting I didn't take advantage of recently as I traveled to Japan, so I could have just come into here and rather than worrying about the actual time differential, is I could have come in and set it to Melbourne, Sydney, which I believe is Japan by looking at the little digital map here, and had all of my files and time automatically set. It's critical that you do this because when you import images, they will be organized by date and time, not only in your operating system, but in your post-production software, especially if you're using a program like Lightroom Classic and you want to take advantage of the date time settings. So make sure that you have your date and time set correctly. And if you have multiple cameras, use your iPhone or Samsung or Google device and use the global clock, and then make sure that your date and time is set correctly, and always check when daylight savings time comes around so you're not an hour ahead or an hour behind everybody else. So the next thing to talk about, and probably the one that I'm going to get the most feedback on in the comments section, is image quality. Go to the red camera, go to #1 for image quality, and then come down to image quality settings and then hit select or the center button. Now, this is where you can change how you're recording or what formats that you're recording onto your media cards. It's important to point out, and it's a little difficult, so I have to kind of be careful when I do this, is that you could also change your record media settings, which I'll talk about in just 1 second here. This is applies if you have dual memory card slots, which I have one in slot 1 and slot 2. But first of all, file format, which this particular friend of mine has this set to RAW and JPEG. I disagree with them. I think it should be RAW all the time. In this day and age, you could transfer images from your camera to your smartphone really easily and get a JPEG if you got to email something out to somebody. And it's great because, yeah, that's what JPEGs are great for. But unless you're doing something that specifically requires JPEG, maybe you're doing journalism or sports photography and you're tethered to some Ethernet cable and you're sending JPEGs to a photo editor, there's really no reason to shoot JPEGs anymore. You're just going to get 2 of everything, and you're probably never going to use the JPEG file once it's on your computer, and you're probably going to forget about your JPEG file, and then you're going to have something called data rot. Avoid that. Shoot in RAW only. Ignore JPEG if at all possible, but I'm going to respect my friend here and stay with RAW JPEG. RAW file type, you have a couple of options. You want to go with uncompressed on Sony. You do have some lossless compression here and also generally compressed. The reason why you want to go with uncompressed is because uncompressed RAW in Sony is 14-bit and not 12-bit. It's not about file size or file quality, it's about bit depth. And that's a tremendous upgrade from 12-bit to 14-bit. It doesn't sound like it, but it's a huge jump in tonal levels, and you want to shoot RAW uncompressed. Buy bigger memory cards. You will thank me in the future. JPEG quality, you can change your JPEG quality here if you're going to shoot JPEGs, and you could also change the JPEG image size. So if you wanted to shoot JPEGs, but you didn't need those JPEGs to be super large, you can change the size of the actual JPEGs themselves. Now for record media settings, you could actually access this on a different section of the menu, but since it's here, why not jump into it? This allows you to set how images are recorded if you have more than one card slot and you have memory cards in both. My advice to you is how this is set up. Do simultaneous recording for your photos. Also for video, I think it's a good idea as well. This is going to ensure that if for some reason you have a memory card fail on you, that the second card can serve as a backup. Now, if you're doing any sort of tethering and you are using tethering as your backup, you can just go ahead and start recording in slot 1 and then have it carry over to slot 2 if you have overage. I would do the same with video. This particular friend of mine has it set to slot 1. That's fine. That's great. And I would have auto switch media turned to on, but only if you have it set to slot 1, and then that way it will jump to slot 2 as you're recording that. This way, again, you're ensuring that your memory cards, if one fails, the other one serves as a backup. I live in the world of paranoia. And again, this is totally to prevent any sort of memory card failure or breakage. And believe me, it does happen. Next thing to point out, and this is a minor one, but it's one of those things like, why not do it? You're here. Go to the red camera, go to 3 for file, come over and come down to copyright info and also write serial number. Because this is a friend's camera, I'm not going to show you the photographer or copyright information, but it's very easy to go into and change the photographer's name and copyright information. You want copyright info to be written to every image, so have this to turn on. You also want to display the copyright info. This is only for when you're reviewing images on your camera. It will just always appear. But set your name, set your copyright, change the date every year. So January 1st, change it on your cameras. And also make sure that you write the serial number. I'm going to do my friend a favor and set this to on here. The reason why you want to do this is if for some reason somebody does ever borrow an image of yours and you want to seek some sort of restitution or you want to register images or you have multiple cameras, having those serial numbers makes life a lot easier. I'm sure they automatically get written and there's some deep level of metadata that you could find it in, but why go to that extent? Write your serial number. Well, I'm not going to go deep into this, and I'm going to do another video later on customizing cameras. You could come into shooting mode and you could actually set camera memory and recall camera memory and also share camera memory settings from one camera to another. On most Sony cameras, you will have numbers on your mode dial down here. It might be hard to see, but you have numbers there. So your camera could be set up for one type of shooting at 1, then another type at 2, or another type at 3. Also, if you have the exact same make and model camera, you could actually share that information and go between cameras there. Do take note that it has to be the exact same camera, make and model. I have an A7R Mark IV and an A7R Mark IV Alpha. That doesn't work. Those cameras, for whatever reason, are set up that way to be different enough. But if you have the exact same camera, you could actually share customized settings, and that's a very nice feature. Silent shutter, this is going to be one of those settings that I'm going to highly recommend exploring how to customize buttons. I've talked about this a little bit in other videos. I will probably do another video later on using a newer camera here. But silent shooting is fantastic because it allows you to be super quiet, in fact, silent in situations. But you do have to be aware that you're using an electronic shutter, and that can cause you problems, especially when you have weird lighting. You could get banding, all sorts of stuff like that. So you want to be able to toggle quickly between electronic and mechanical shutter. Also, some wireless triggers for flashes will not work with silent shooting, so you'll have to go back and forth on that. And rather than going into this mode, I would set it up in some sort of quick button or the function, the FN button on the back of your camera to toggle that on and off. Let's hit that. Let's come into here and hit the FN button. There you go. I would set it up in here. That way you could turn silent shooting on and off at any particular time. Image stabilization, still in the red camera, number 8, you'll probably have to scroll down, turn this to on, so that way you have in-body stabilization, and if there's something in a lens that could be used, you want to go ahead and use that as well. Shooting display, number 10. This is a very important one, and it should be a lot higher. First of all, you can change your grid lines, which you see as far as grids, turning them on. You have a few options. You have rule of thirds. You have square grids if you're doing architectural. You also have diagonal if you need that as an additional option. My friend had it set to rule of thirds, so I'll go ahead and accept that. But the other thing here is live view display set. Live view allows you to see what the exposure settings that you currently have on your camera, it allows you to see how bright or dark those things are. With it currently set to on, when I come into here, if all of a sudden I'm in manual mode and I was to make this a lot darker by dropping the aperture down from 2.0 to 5.6, you would see that happen in real time. And that is a great feature. But there are times where you don't want that to be in place because you need help with focusing, or maybe you're using flash and you need to be able to focus in a dark setting. So what I highly recommend is having this set as a function button or something like that, because if you have to keep going back and forth between the menu here, it can get a bit much. But notice now, as I turn that off, that if I go to 5.6, it doesn't change. So again, either a customized button, a C1 or a C2 on your particular camera, or that FN button, either thing is great. But make sure that you have it set to some quick button, especially if you're working with strobe or flash photography. Next setting to point out is found in the exposure section. This is the pink icon, number 1 for exposure. This is where you could change ISO and also your ISO range limit. One thing to point out here is I've done a whole video on aperture priority and how Sony handles this. This setting has not changed at all on the new cameras, but you can see where it is placed. It's always been in the ISO area or ISO area, but I just wanted to point that out. But one thing to point out with ISO range limit is a great feature here because this is going to limit your ISO if you go into automatic ISO. So if you don't want your ISO to go as high as 20,000 or 200,000, you can limit that range. And a good test is throw your camera into program mode and just throw your camera on a tripod and then go through your ISOs and see when noise becomes unacceptable and never go above that, and use ISO range limit to help you through that. Metering is a very important topic and it's a very complicated one. In fact, I've just wrapped up a video on metering, so please take a look for that on my channel. But in metering here, this is where you could change your metering modes. Usually that's assigned to a custom button or again, that FN menu. But two things to point out, I would highly recommend turning on face priority for multi-metering. That way, if you're using facial recognition, it will find a face and expose for it. Also, if you like spot metering and you ever use single autofocus point, you could link the two together. This is great for difficult things that you have to autofocus on, as well as taking into account difficult exposure situations. All of your face and eye detect functionality are found in the purple AFMF section. Number 3 is where you have face eye detection. I highly recommend you explore this. It's great. I would turn it on. You have your ability to change your subject. Again, a recommendation is assign the face eye subject to a button. That way you could quickly go from human, bird, animal, car, whatever your particular Sony has available to you, you could do that. Some cameras like this one have even more features, the ability to change left, right eye, also how the face and the eye display. I would have that set to on so you could see if it's actually tracking with a particular eye. That is a really good feature, so you know that it is working. But some Sony cameras have this feature, but there's only a few options, where this camera is a newer camera and has far more options, but explore those. But I would highly recommend that you have both the turning the eye on and off and the actual subject set in some sort of menu. Again, that's going to be something that you're going to come back and forth on, and you really need to be able to customize that. One of my favorite features about Sony cameras is focus assist. Again, in the AFMF purple section, come into autofocus magnifier and MF and turn this on. What this means is when you throw the camera into manual focus and then rotate the manual focus ring, that it's automatically going to zoom in to a certain percentage and allow you to have better control over your manual focus. Now, where does it zoom into? It depends on what focusing mode that you're in, but you can control it usually with a single point a lot easier than other points, and it will just hop to wherever you're going. This gives you hyper accurate control over manual focus. It's important to point out that focus magnifier doesn't really give you any control. It's an actual separate option that allows you to do an additional type of manual focus. So basically it gives you the same control, but it doesn't involve the ring. It's not one of my favorite features. So turn this on, don't use focus magnifier. But if you are going to use focus magnifier, you could have autofocus be turned on for autofocus magnifier. I really think focus magnifier is not a great feature, but that manual focus on the lens, it's so easy because once you throw that switch on your lens, you're now in manual focus and it will automatically magnify for you. Speaking of manual focus, use peaking display when you're in manual focus. You can change when the display's on or off. Again, a great customized key to use. And then you could change the level of peaking, how that contrast pops, and also the color. Probably change it to something other than white. Let's just do our friend a favor here and change it to red. So that way it stands out, as long as you don't have a subject that is primarily red. So one nice thing about Sony cameras is you could customize the buttons to behave one way when you're shooting photos, another way when you're shooting video, and also behave another way when you're reviewing video or still photos. So when you do come into these, when you come in, say, to photo and go over one more, what I like is it shows you the actual outline of the camera, so you don't have to guess what these buttons are, and it will give you the rear of the camera, the rear control panel, the top buttons, the lens button. So if you have a Sony lens that has a button on it, you could change how that behaves, as well as the dials on your camera. It's okay to experiment and customize all the buttons. The most important thing is just remember where this is, so you can come back and turn that back on or off if you need. Another feature in this menu is the DISP. There's a DISP button. It's an up arrow on the little control wheel. And this allows you to visually change what you see in both the monitor, which is the LCD screen on the back of the camera, or the viewfinder. If I come into monitor here, you could see all the information and all the display info is currently turned on. You could turn some of that on or off, totally depends on what you're doing. And it's a personal preference. There's no right or wrong here. It's just what you want to do. If you come back one level, you could also change certain features for the finder when you look through the viewfinder. So if you want certain things turned on with the LCD screen, but not when you look through the viewfinder, you have those options available. And again, no right or wrong. It's just what you want to see. You do have some additional features with dial customized, but a lot of this is just rehash. I don't know why Sony gives you both operations, but it's there. You also have touch operation. I don't like touch screens, but you can have touch operation and how that works. A setting that could save you battery time, especially because mirrorless cameras do drain their batteries pretty fast, is power setting options. I would have this set so power save starts after 1 minute. You could wake up the camera really fast by just hitting the shutter button. The camera doesn't draw that much power when it's in a sleep mode. So if I'm out shooting, I will just leave my camera on the entire time and wake it up by just hitting the shutter button. One annoying feature about most cameras is the autofocus beep sound. If you're working in a church, if you're at a wedding venue, if you're at a corporate event, you can't have that. Go into number 10, so the sound option. So we're still in the toolbox. Go into number 10, go to audio signals and turn those off. So that way when you have autofocus, you're not getting a beep and you're not disrupting whatever you're shooting. So my last tip is for those of you that are traveling and want to leave your power charger at home. Go into the toolbox, go to number 11 for USB, come into USB power supply and make sure this is set to on. What this means is when you connect a USB cable to this camera, and that's a USB-C cable, as long as that cable is connected to something that is a charger and that cable can hold a charge, you will be able to charge the battery inside the camera. Now, it's very important to point out, you can only do this when the camera is off on most Sony cameras. I say most because I can't verify all Sony cameras, but every camera that I've ever used, it will only charge when it is off. But it will also run when you're plugged into it. So it will go from running off the battery to running off a USB. So if you need to do like long exposures or plug it into an external battery power pack, this is another setting that you could use this for and you want it set to on. The only reason to ever turn this off is if you're shooting or doing tethering. I talk about that again in the tethering video that I mentioned earlier. And if you ever have tethering issues or connection issues, you want to set this to off and turn that off. Otherwise, leave it to on, leave the charger at home, and just invest in a good USB cable and charger that you're probably charging your phone with or other accessories, and you could charge your camera without having to take the battery out. Well, I hope you've liked these tips and tricks. This is certainly just a quick walkthrough, but I think these are the essential things that get you up and going. Obviously, there's deeper things. I've done videos on metering. I've done them on zebras. I've done them on autofocus. So please take a look at my channel for in-depth things on those. Since this is a Sony specific video, I will say those videos are done for Sony as well, so you can get a lot of information there. But again, these were just some general tips. You're just getting the camera out of the box, some things to turn on, some things to think about as you're moving forward, enjoying your new Sony camera. I hope you've liked this video as much as you like your new camera. Please hit that like button down below. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do so. And if you have, thank you for your support. And please share this with anybody who's just bought a Sony camera and they're just trying to figure out those menu settings. It can be a little intimidating at first. And until next time, I'm MD Welch wishing you all the best from PhotoKitchen.